Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant and, frankly, quite devastating event, the Easter Sunday attacks in Sri Lanka back on April 21st, 2019.
Indeed. And we're not just, skimming the surface here.
No, definitely not. We're going straight to the source. This is the final report from the Commission of Inquiry. It's a massive piece of work released January 31st, 2021, really aimed at understanding what happened.
Right, and why it happened. This wasn't just a quick look. The commission had a really broad mandate.
What exactly were they tasked with?
Well, essentially, to investigate the attacks thoroughly, identify everyone involved, directly or even indirectly.
So not just the attackers themselves.
No, also individuals or maybe organizations that might have played some part. And crucially, they had to look at potential failures.
Mhm.
Did the authorities miss something? Could they have prevented it? And then recommend actions.
And the scale of this investigation, it sounds enormous.
Oh, it was. Think about this. They examined 1588 witness statements.
Wow.
That alone is over 30,000 pages of testimony.
30,000.
Yeah, and added that nearly 2,400 documents, lots of audio, video evidence too. The final report is spread across multiple volumes.
So it covers everything.
Pretty much, from the sort of background context of extremism in Sri Lanka right down to the specific attack details, and importantly, the warnings that came beforehand.
So our goal here for you listening is to unpack some of the key sections of this report. We want to get a deeper understanding of all the factors involved, moving, beyond the initial news headlines.
Exactly. We'll look at the environment, the ideologies, the key players, and those critical moments where things might have gone differently.
Okay, let's dive in. The report, it starts by setting the scene, defining terms. Chapter 2 talks about the path from extremism to terrorism. What did you find most important there?
Well, the report uses this concept, the staircase to terrorism, which I think is quite helpful. It lays out a kind of progression. It defines extremism as basically an ideology that accepts violence for political or ideological goals. But it starts earlier, with this idea of exclusivism, believing only your group has the truth.
Right.
And the report points to Zaharan Hashim's speeches, where he apparently pushed this idea that Muslims should only really associate with those who followed his very specific interpretation of Islam.
Creating a kind of echo chamber almost.
Exactly, that us versus them thinking. It notes Sri Lanka didn't even have a specific legal definition of terrorism at the time, which is interesting.
That us versus them seems key. And the report also mentions a specific place, Karinkakuri.
Yes, Kadikoti. It's described as, well, unique, an area with a really high density of mosques and visible signs of Islamic conservatism.
And the significance of that.
The commission suggests that maybe the authorities didn't fully grasp how this environment, perhaps somewhat separate from mainstream society, could become a place where more extreme views might develop without much challenge or broader input.
Okay, so Chapter 3 then gives us context on the Muslim community in Sri Lanka. It's a community with deep roots, right?
Absolutely. Very deep. The report traces their history back to Arab traders centuries ago. It emphasizes long stretches of peaceful coexistence alongside other communities.
But not always peaceful.
No, there were also periods of disputes and conflicts like any long history. The 2012 census showed Muslims were about 9.7% of the population, mostly Sunni.
And within that community, there are different groups and movements. The report mentions a couple specifically.
It does. It talks about groups like Jamaat-e-Islami or JMI, and also Tawhid Jamaat.
Tawhid Jamaat seems particularly relevant here.
Yes, especially because it later fractured. The report outlines its core beliefs, generally a very strict interpretation of monotheism, Tawhid, but then it's split into different factions over, ideological details.
Different interpretations leading to different groups.
Exactly, and understanding that is kind of important for the later events.
Right. Which leads us nicely into chapters 4 and 5, focusing on Wahhabism and its specific role in Sri Lanka. This term comes up a lot. How does the report frame it?
It defines Wahhabism as this conservative movement within Sunni Islam, really focused on the uniqueness and unity of God, Tawhid, as you said. It started with Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab in the Arabian Peninsula.
And its core ideas.
A very strict adherence to what they see as fundamental Islamic teaching, rejecting practices viewed as deviations or later innovations.
And the report connects us to global trends.
Yes, significantly. It notes that Saudi Arabia began actively promoting Wahhabism globally from the 1970s onwards.
And that promotion reached Sri Lanka.
It did. And the report suggests this global push had a noticeable impact locally.
Impact in what way? Did it cause friction?
It seems so. The report details how the emergence of Wahhabi and Salafi influenced groups, sometimes with funding and ideas from abroad, led to tensions,
Tensions with whom?
particularly with Sufi Muslims, who often practice a more, let's say, mystical or inclusive form of Islam. The report actually cites examples of confrontations, even attacks on Sufi mosques or individuals linked to this rising Wahhabi influence.
So external ideologies potentially creating internal divisions?
That's the picture painted. It also mentions foreign preachers coming in and educational materials spreading these ideas.
You mentioned education. The report raises concerns about madrasas, too.
Yes, this is a significant point they make. Concerns about the content in some Islamic educational books, but also the structure of madrasa education itself.
What kind of structural issues?
A lack of sort of centralized supervision or consistent standards, varying quality, and also sometimes not enough focus on teaching the national languages, Sinhala and Tamil.
So the commission recommended changes?
Yes, they recommended better regulation and oversight of Islamic education to address these issues.
Okay, moving on to the international picture now. Chapter 6 looks at ISIS and Sri Lanka. What was the connection there?
Well, the report gives an overview of ISIS's ideology, its global expansion, including into South Asia. It states the first known Sri Lankans actually went to join ISIS in Syria around 2013.
So there were Sri Lankans who physically joined ISIS.
Yes, and the report profiles some of them, their backgrounds, what happened to them.
But did ISIS direct the Easter attacks?
That's the key question. The report concludes ISIS didn't directly orchestrate them, like sending orders for this specific plot.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, it found clear evidence that the attackers, especially Zaharan, had established links with ISIS.
How? Online?
Primarily, yes.
Uh.
Through online radicalization, adopting ISIS's ideology, it's sort of justification for violence. The report even mentions they use the term Dawla Islamia, Islamic State, among themselves in Sri Lanka.
So it was more ideological alignment and inspiration?
Precisely. A local group inspired by and adopting the mantle of a global terror network.
Got it. So Chapter 7 then focuses right in on early days of Zaharan Hashim, who seems to be the central figure. What was his background?
He was born in 1986, had some early religious education, initially got involved with Wahhabism, then started his own small organization, Darul Athar Ad-Da'iyah.
But his views became more extreme.
Yes, progressively so. The report details how he clashed with more traditional Islamic leaders, and he was eventually expelled from a madrasa.
Why was he expelled?
Because of his increasingly radical views. And that expulsion seems like a real turning point, pushing him further away from mainstream structures.
And this led to the formation of the NTJ, the National Tawheed Jamaat.
Exactly. The report tracks this timeline, establishing the NTJ, and his rhetoric becoming more and more openly supportive of violence.
Did they just talk or did they take action?
They took action. The report gives details of training camps run by Zaharan and the NTJ starting around 2015.
Training camps? What kind of training?
Physical fitness, some weapons handling. They specifically mentioned T-56 assault rifles and even bomb-making instruction. The report names locations and some key people involved. It shows a group actively preparing.
Actively preparing for violence. Okay, so Chapters 8 and 11 then talk about him going into hiding, but still preparing for the attacks.
Right. He went underground around 2017. This was as his views got more extreme in public and after clashes with other groups.
But he didn't stop organizing?
Not at all. While in hiding, he continued his efforts using online propaganda, recruiting people. The report even identifies specific safe houses they use for planning and, critically, for assembling the bombs.
They knew where these safe houses were.
The investigation uncovered specific locations used by the group.
And the materials for the bombs.
The report details how they got hold of things like nitric acid, urea, detonators, the key components.
Chillingly methodical.
Yes. And it covers the target selection, too. Hotels, churches, places frequented by foreigners and Christians.
Did the report say why those targets?
It outlines Zaharan's stated reasons, framing it as revenge for perceived injustices against Muslims worldwide.
And then the suicide bombers themselves.
Yes, the report addresses that, too. Their final preparations, the videos they recorded pledging allegiance, stating their motives, it's all documented.
This is all building a very grim picture. Which brings us to maybe the most critical part, Chapters 12 and 13 on early warnings and missed opportunities. This is where the official response comes under scrutiny.
Deep scrutiny. This is a really central and, frankly, deeply concerning part of the report.
What did the Commission find about warnings?
They found that Sri Lankan intelligence did receive significant warnings before the attacks.
From whom?
including very specific warnings from foreign intelligence services. These weren't vague. They warned about an impending attack by Zaharan's group, and they specifically mentioned churches as targets.
Churches specifically. And they had dates, names.
The report includes specific dates when warnings were received, the content, even names of some potential attackers that were passed on.
So highly specific intelligence.
Extremely. There's one key warning mentioned, received by the Director of the State Intelligence Service, the SIS, on April 4th, 2019, just weeks before the attack.
And what did that April 4th warning say?
It identified potential targets and named individuals involved, including Zaharan.
So they had the names, the likely targets, weeks in advance. But the attacks happened. Why? What went wrong, according to the report?
The report points to, well, serious failures. Failures in how that intelligence was shared, disseminated, and acted upon within the security system.
It just got lost or ignored.
It seems like a breakdown in the process. Despite how detailed the warnings were, the report says there was a lack of coordinated action, a lack of proper follow-up.
So the commission believed the attacks could have been prevented.
Their assessment is quite clear. The intelligence available was sufficient to warrant preventative action. They highlight specific examples of delays or inadequate responses from key officials.
So not just one mistake, but potentially a systemic issue.
Yes, it suggests a systemic breakdown in communication and, critically, in prioritizing and acting on credible, urgent threat information. Yeah. It wasn't just one missed memo.
It's hard to hear. A stark reminder of the consequences.
Mm.
The report also mentioned earlier incidents, right? Chapter 9, Maunela to Wanathawalua. Were these also missed signals?
That's what the report suggests, yes. It mentions things like Zaharan's group damaging Buddha statues in Maunela in late 2018.
Okay.
And then, in January 2019, there was a significant discovery of explosives and training materials in a place called Wanathawalua.
That sounds like a huge red flag.
It should have been. But the report indicates that these earlier events weren't properly connected to the later specific warnings about the large-scale plot.
Another missed opportunity.
Another piece of the puzzle that wasn't put together in time, it seems, representing a failure to see the bigger picture building up.
So if we take a step back now and look at everything this commission report lays out, it's incredibly complex.
It really is. The Easter Sunday attacks weren't caused by just one thing. They were the result of this complex interplay.
What are the main strands you see?
Well, clearly the rise of extremist ideologies within a part of the Sri Lankan Muslim community. Then there's the influence of global networks like ISIS providing inspiration.
Right.
You also have the internal dynamics, those tensions we talked about within the broader Muslim community. And then overlaying all of that, these critical failures in the intelligence and security systems.
Yeah, the report really paints this sobering picture of warnings received but not acted upon effectively. Missed opportunities seems to be a recurring theme.
Definitely. It really hammers home how vital it is to understand the nuances of radicalization, but also, just as importantly, to have security mechanisms that actually work, that share information and act on it decisively.
It leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does. And maybe a question for you, the listener, to ponder. Given everything we've discussed, the detailed warnings, the known background, what are the bigger lessons here, not just for Sri Lanka, but globally?
How do we prevent this kind of tragedy?
How can intelligence be shared better? How can it be analyzed and acted on more effectively to actually safeguard communities? This deep dive, it's a stark look at how radicalization happens, but also at the critical, sometimes fragile nature of our security systems.